host and moderator of the Generation Restoration Dialogues for the UNCCD G20 Global Land Initiative. Today, we are joined first by our co-host, Yue Jiang. Yue, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi there. Hello, everyone. My name is Ziyue. I'm from the G20 Global Land Initiative team of communication. It's a pleasure to be co-hosting today's webinar. I will be following the chat throughout the session. Please drop your questions there anytime, and we will bring as many as we can into the Q&A in the second half.
Thank you, Yue. Like she said, we will be waiting for her in the second half for audience questions for our speakers. And I will introduce our speakers now. We have two speakers as per usual. First, we have Xenya Scanlon. She is the Chief of Communications, External Relations, and Partnerships at UNCCD. And she brings with her 20 years of experience on sustainability issues with the United Nations and other international organizations across Africa, Australia, and Europe. Xenya, could you please say hello to our audience?
Yes, good afternoon, greetings. Thank you so much, Sabrina, to you and Samante. Really delighted to be joining this webinar and sharing some of the exciting things that we're planning for COP17 and in particular Land and People Day at COP17. And thank you so much to all the participants who have taken the time to join us. And I'm sure we'll be following COP17 developments, whether in Mongolia or from afar. Thank you.
Thank you, Xenya. Now we have Samante Anne to introduce. She is the head of program, strategy, and partnerships at the Mainyoito Pastoralist Integrated Development Organization, which is an Indigenous Peoples organization working across Africa to advance the rights, inclusion, and sustainable development of Indigenous and marginalized communities. She primarily focuses on Indigenous peoples' rights, climate change, land and natural resource governance, gender equality, women's and girls' empowerment, and sustainable livelihoods. A very full plate. Samante, would you like to say hello to our audience?
Yes, thank you very much, Sabrina. I hope you can hear me, probably see me. Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. It's really great to be here, and I'm so happy to be one of the panelists today. Truly honored. And I see a very big audience from my screen here, which I don't know whether it's good for the speakers or not, but I know we will have a wonderful discussion. So thank you very much.
Of course. All right, so brief introduction for those of us who are joining us for the first time live. Generation Restoration Dialogues is a series of monthly webinars hosted by the UNCCD G20 Global Land Initiative. We are an initiative that aims to reduce degraded land by 50% by 2040. Make sure you visit our website at g20land.org. You can learn more about our activities, and of course, be sure to follow us on social media for updates on the monthly dialogue and other events. Now, a brief introduction on our topic today of land and people. We are talking about something that predates every economy, every government, every institution. We're talking about land, and more specifically, the people whose lives are most deeply intertwined with it. We talk a lot in these dialogues about restoring land. We talk about the science and technicalities of it. We talk about the financing, the policy. But today we want to kind of broaden the lens because tangible land restoration happens on the ground in communities, usually through the hands and knowledge of the people who have lived on and cared for that land for generations. That includes pastoralists, Indigenous peoples, women, youth, local communities. These are the groups who often know the land the best, but are often too rarely centered in the discussions that affect it. This might be most visible when considering rangelands, for example. Rangelands cover more than half of the Earth's land surface and support up to 2 billion people. They're among the most vital but overlooked ecosystems on the planet, and pastoralists who have stewarded them for centuries face increasing pressure due to degradation, climate stress, policy, displacement, et cetera, et cetera. If we zoom in on yet another important group, women, for example, produce up to half of the world's food, but own less than 20% of land globally. These connections here between land and people are what we will try to touch on today. And with COP17 coming up now in less than 2 weeks, the topic of land and people will have a dedicated action day full of discussions and activities about this. We will discuss all of that in more detail in a moment. Before we start, as always, I want to remind everyone to submit questions into the Q&A box while we are having this main discussion. We will have the dedicated audience question and answer session after this main chat. All right. Now, to get started with our speakers, Xenya, I'd really love it if you could help us further understand why the topic is important. As I mentioned, we talk about restoring land, and we really want to spotlight this month the people who steward it. But why, generally, is it so important to put people and not just ecosystems at the center of restoration?
Thank you very much, Sabrina, for framing the discussion already so well and for really focusing on this inextricable link between land and people. And this is exactly what we're trying to do at COP17. As you mentioned, it's going to be starting less than 2 weeks from now on the 17th of August in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. And the theme for COP17 is restoring land, restoring hope. As part of the COP17 action agenda, we will be focusing on Land and People Day on the 26th of August. And again, it is absolutely intentional that we put land and people as the two components of the same day. So we would really like to reinforce that fact that land stewardship is central to the success of the activities that we may lead as a convention on combating drought, on preventing and combating desertification and land degradation, which affects already up to 40% of the world's surface and affects many billions of people, at least 3 billion, but it's definitely a conservative estimate because we know that our economies, our well-being, our prosperity on this planet really depends on land. And it is people who really are the stewards of the land. We will be focusing in particular on rangelands, as you mentioned, and their stewards, the pastoralists. While 2 billion people worldwide do depend on rangelands for various needs, from food security to water cycles, to biodiversity conservation, climate mitigation, and many other things, it is 500 million pastoralists who really serve as those stewards of those vast territories. And indeed, this year coincides with the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists that has been declared by the United Nations. So for us, throughout COP17, and in particular on the 26th of August on Land and People Day, we will be shining that spotlight on rangelands and pastoralists as, again, the guardians of our collective well-being on this planet.
Great answer. Thank you so much for framing that. Now, you mentioned the pastoralists. I actually want to hop over to Samante for a moment, because as far as I understand, you work directly with pastoralist communities in Kenya, and you have seen how climate change and land degradation are shaping or reshaping landscapes and livelihoods. How are these changes directly affecting communities on the ground? And what kind of lessons can we learn from pastoralists who are building resilience?
Thank you very much, Sabrina. And yes, I don't just work with pastoralists, but I am a pastoralist woman from the southern part of Kenya, bordering northern Tanzania. So pastoralists from Kenya and Tanzania border each other, actually only separated by colonial boundaries. And yes, when you talk about the impact of climate change to these communities, I think I have witnessed challenges related with climate change. Climate change has moved from, being just an environmental kind of concern, but it is becoming more of a social, cultural, and economic crisis within the pastoralist communities. Communities are experiencing, very frequent droughts, very prolonged droughts, which of course have a direct impact on people's livelihoods, especially with pastoralists who depend purely on pastoralism as their sole source of income or source of livelihood, so to speak. Climate change has, led to shrinking water sources, of course, degraded grazing lands. And now we are experiencing a lot of conflict over natural resources, because now there's more scramble for these resources because of the fact that the resources are actually the grazing lands and the water source resources are diminishing. And livestock, pastoralists continue to lose their livestock, which bring around a lot of food insecurity and basically shattered livelihoods. And also this has an implication definitely on women and youth. For example, women in a pastoralist setup, once we do the migration from place one point to another in search of the pastures, and women are normally left behind, of course, to take care of the children, the families and the weaker animals sometimes that are not able to move from one point to another. And these, they are not left with any resources. I mean, so this become even more worse for pastoralist women. And for the youth, it also has a direct impact on them, as they are forced to move from, from our setup or our ecosystems or our rural setup to even migrating to urban areas in search of alternative sources of livelihoods. But as we look into all these challenges, I think it is important, and this is something that is missed out every other time, that as much as Indigenous peoples and pastoralists are victims, or they face firsthand impact when it comes to climate change, they also come about with solutions. And this is a solution that is normally undervalued, if I can call it that, or not really given the prominence that it requires. And I remember one day someone asked me, "You pastoralists, how have you managed to stay around despite these serious impacts of climate change? How have you, managed to still have a small herd of animals despite all these challenges?" The answer has always been the fact that Indigenous peoples also have generations of knowledge that have enabled them to adapt to the ever-changing climate or climate shocks. And this knowledge is one of them. For example, one aspect of this is the mobility. Pastoralists do not just move aimlessly around, but it was a way of, sustainably managing the landscape. And also, this is a pillar of resilience. That is why we keep saying that anytime you undermine, anytime you restrict the movement or the mobility of pastoralists, then you cause more harm. You undermine their resilience, you cause even more land degradation. And of course, out of all these, one of the pillars also around the traditional knowledge is the customary governance system. For the longest time, we have this system that really dictates on how we manage our lands. And when now we start experiencing these climatic shocks, the same knowledge and the same governance authority dictates how we can move around and manage the resources more sustainably. So the main lesson that we can learn, just to conclude on your question, is that resilience was there for these communities even before, pegged, of course, grounded on the traditional knowledge. And so instead of looking down upon this knowledge, we need to remove the perception, because this has always happened, the perception that this knowledge is backward, the perception that this knowledge doesn't work, because it has worked for a whole, millions of communities. I think there were already statistics given out there. So instead of replacing this, instead of looking down upon this, how can we strengthen it? How can we integrate it into the scientific systems? I mean, we can only make it better. How can we recognize it and protect it? Sometimes it also opens up windows for exploitation. So we need to protect it. We need to recognize it. We need to integrate it into the whole, our own scientific knowledge. And of course, this is highly pegged to secure land rights and of course also some form of improved access to climate information. And of course, what I talked about earlier, the recognition of the existing customary governance structures that have worked for all these years. Thank you.
Great answer, very expansive. And I think that leads into my next question, which I want to pose to both of you. Maybe Xenya can answer first to give Samante a break. So you directly mentioned how even just the movement of pastoralists, Samante, and how it is so essential, it has become like a pillar of resistance even. We talk about pastoralist women and we talk about local communities being underrepresented in policy decisions that affect this movement and affect the land that they depend on. So in terms of conversations between governments and people on the ground, why does this disconnect persist? And what needs to change to ensure these voices are heard in restoration policy and practice? Maybe Xenya, you can answer from the policy practice side first.
Thank you very much, Sabrina, and thank you so much, Anne, Samante, for really highlighting some of the day-to-day realities that you see obviously on the ground, and the fact that indeed we have this incredible paradox, if not travesty, that those who really have the knowledge, the solutions, and the proximity to the lands that we have out there are not always fully integrated and involved meaningfully in the discussions at all levels. Indeed, pastoralists have been in many situations been marginalized and not able to really be seen as valuable partners in efforts for sustainable land management and restoration. And for us, it is not only the right thing to do, but it's also what makes it successful, is to ensure that we bring together the local knowledge, the local ownership, and the collaboration. This is in fact what we are trying to do also and promote throughout the year, and including at COP17. For instance, we are organizing as part of the Land and People Day a number of convenings, some of them for the very first time, of the various constituencies that are engaged in sustainable land management, land restoration, rangeland management around the world. For the first time, we will have the convenings of indigenous peoples, of local communities. We will have a specific event focusing on pastoralists as well, and with the participation of pastoralists from around the world who will be in Mongolia already preparing for the COP on the eve of the COP itself through the global gathering, and also communities that we have engaged throughout this year through the Silk Road Caravan journey, which is a physical and symbolic journey connecting our previous COP16 in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia with the upcoming COP in Mongolia. And this is really a caravan that has already covered more than 6,000 kilometers throughout various Eurasian countries. But of course, the metaphor exists not only in these geographies, but can be applied in many other places where people do move and people do exchange knowledge and experiences. And this is exactly where we hope to bring together governments, local communities, pastoralists, indigenous peoples, women, youth, all those who have a strong stake in the decisions that are being made. And we really hope that COP17 will also be the forum where we will see some of these initiatives taking shape. In addition, and I'm really happy that you also mentioned the issue of land rights, and in particular women's land rights. This is also an issue which the convention has focused on for many years, and in particular in 2023, when we had our Desertification and Drought Day, taking the theme of her land, her rights. This is indeed something that we have seen as the most incredible evidence of inequalities that exist around the world. And it's really not just a particular geography that is concerned. It really is, according to our experts, more than 100 countries around the world that have some sort of barriers, be they legal, be they customary, in terms of women's ability to effectively access and own and manage land and associated resources. So this is again something where we have, as a convention, put a lot of emphasis. And again, at the upcoming COP17, during the Gender Caucus that will convene also on the 26th of August as part of Land and People Day, the focus will be specifically on women herders and women pastoralists, and again, how we can really bring their experiences, their solutions, their knowledge, their leadership to help us in advancing the global restoration and sustainable land management agenda.
Great. I'm so looking forward to it, actually, now that you have gone into detail about all the events at COP17. Maybe Samante, would you like to expand on that and say, from your perspective, what kind of things need to be done to amplify those voices?
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I was muted. So, thank you very much, Xenia. And of course, there's a lot of progress when it comes to Indigenous peoples' participation, and actually the whole coordination aspect at the UNCCD, which is very, very positive for us. Especially with the establishment of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus. That was, I think this was a decision that was passed in the last COP16 in Riyadh. So we are really optimistic that the UNCCD will eventually be one of the platforms that we can really use to air our voices, and we really hope that the new changes coming around, or the new acknowledgement of the contribution of these communities is going to be had. So just back to your question, Sabrina, and by the way, we really look forward to engaging in this upcoming COP17. I think we have organized a number of events there. We have a delegation of pastoralists from our communities from across the region, for example, in Africa. And so we really look forward to achieving much in this particular COP, especially considering that it is the year of the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralism. So one of the things that can help to that pastoralists are not only heard, or their voices are not only heard, but rather there's influence, is the issue of meaningful participation. There is participation, just participation, but there's need for meaningful participation. I keep saying that for meaningful participation to occur, then you have to, to have a platform that you are considered as an equal partner, not just a beneficiary, because that changes how you engage. And so whenever you are given the rightful, space where you are participating as an equal partner, then that gives you the voice by itself. That makes it meaningful rather than just being present without really having that strong voice to really voice out your issues and having your issues captured. And I think, again, when we talk of participation must definitely translate into influence. And this means being at the decision-making table, not just now as partners, but also getting that influence must be the fact that you are taken in, for example, in some of these high-level decision-making processes. We keep saying the issues of having pastoralists or Indigenous people sitting in some governing boards or even technical committees, because we have gotten to that point whereby we are, that is a point that will give you the strength and the mandate to speak. And so there is participation, meaningful participation, but also being, part of the really decision-making table by taking up even slots. I feel already empowered by speaking here today, because I know the many people that are listening here are make me in my head know that I've reached out to a number of people. But it's not just about the numbers, it's about who are you speaking to, how are you speaking to, how do you have, what power comes with your words, and what power comes with this power will definitely be tied to the position. So we moved a long time ago from the principle, for example, of nothing about us without us. we must make this principle very operational. There is no way that I will keep saying that, yes, we acknowledge these people, we recognize them, but they do not have that opportunity to be part and parcel of these governance structures. So meaningful participation, acknowledging this group as partners, acknowledging the fact that they come here with contribution, they have a contribution to make, so they are not just coming there as victims that want to be protected. And also, of course, translating this into influence through having them in some of these positions in the governing boards, in the governance structures, because this is the only time that they'll be able to speak up their priorities, speak up for themselves. So for me, and also there is need for sustained advocacy. I believe the reason why we were able to have the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, it's through advocacy. That was my first COP ever to participate. There was a lot of advocacy, and there's need to sustain this advocacy because, advocacy sometimes leads to policy shifts. In Kenya today, we are celebrating having adopted an Indigenous Peoples policy many, many years after independence, and this is something that have been earned through advocacy. So there is need to support these communities in their advocacy, because much of what we are celebrating today have come out of consistent advocacy over the years.
Perfect. So I guess that leads me to my next question, which is I kind of want to expand on what you just noted. I like what you said about meaningful participation and how it's not just about the number of people who are reached, it's about the connection and equal respect within the platforms. But when I consider our audience right now, a lot of them are youth leaders, a lot of them are students, a lot of them, it is very expensive, but we do have a lot of individuals who want to support Indigenous and pastoralist communities, but they aren't sure exactly how, and they don't necessarily have big platforms like this one to be able to amplify. So what are the most meaningful ways maybe smaller organizations and individuals can become better partners in supporting these restoration efforts?
And would you like to start?
Oh, okay, you can proceed, Xenia. Please proceed.
Oh.
Well, again, it's another absolutely critical, not only audience, but partner for us. Young people really have to be meaningfully engaged in the future of land stewardship. Not only because it's the right thing to say, and it's what a lot of organizations are investing in, but for us it's one, because we see that there is a huge generational gap when it comes to the management of our land. A lot of farmers around the world these days are actually quite wiser and more mature. So there has to be that new generation and the young people who will be involved in and attracted to derive their livelihood from land and to be really engaged in be it farming or pastoralism, to really take on that legacy and contribute to developing it further. We know that, for instance, around the world, 1 billion young people live in regions where livelihoods depend directly on land-based economies. How do we make these opportunities really available to young people who also face very often barriers in either sort of accessing the land and resources, or sometimes also even being given credit at the bank. It's not always the straightforward path, and we really have, as a convention, been working on the youth engagement strategy for many years, again together with the young people who are involved in the work of the convention. We hope that this youth engagement strategy will further continue to develop at COP17 and beyond COP17, because also there will be a convening of the youth forum for 2 days during the first week of the COP. And then there's going to be a high-level event with young representatives and others during the Land and People Day again. So we're trying to make sure that we provide that platform to hear and meaningfully involve the various key groups who really will help us shape that future direction of travel and land stewardship. What I also wanted to mention is actually the setting of Mongolia as COP17 host country is also very fitting, because it's a country that knows firsthand the impacts of desertification and land degradation. 77% of the country's territory is already degraded. So again, you can see that it's not an abstract concept, and it is something that is a lived reality. And secondly, it has a very strong tradition of pastoralism, where 1/3 of the country's population is directly dependent on these types of livelihoods. They're part of the national identity, traditions, etc. And again, what we hope to be able to showcase through COP17 is how really countries are finding solutions that are adaptable to each context. And for instance, in Mongolia, it has also had a very strong connection and tradition between the pastoralists and the let's say the indigenous groups and local communities. So we're hoping that through COP17 we will be able to bring these voices to the fore and to really celebrate achievements. And one of the things that will happen at the end of Land and People Day is when our partners from the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration will also be announcing some of the successful examples from around the world of efforts on land restoration. And as again, these efforts are the efforts of the people who are behind them. So we're really looking forward to hearing more about those positive examples, maybe sharing some of those solutions that could be adaptable and practicable. And we will definitely have a very strong involvement also of youth negotiators at this COP17. So young people who have taken exactly that that task of not only participating and attending events, but really contributing to the agenda of the convention.
Very well said. Thank you, Xenia. Do you have anything to add, Samante, before we head to live audience?
Yes, just to add on Xenia's presentation, and just to respond, trying to respond very quickly on how to become better partners in supporting the community-led efforts, or rather pastoralists and indigenous peoples. I think the first thing is to ensure that we have that kind of genuine partnership. We need to invest into ensuring that communities come in, and as they come in, they are given the opportunity to be part and parcel of designing any projects or any ideas. Bring them on board from the first day. Don't bring them on board later on, because that brings about mistrust. And it feels from those of us now from this other side, the pastoralists, you feel disrespected. And so there's need to build and invest and be very intentional about making the partnership very genuine and making it as effective as it should, taking into consideration the elements I spoke about earlier. Then, of course, there's need to show up on, I can say, long-term engagement. I think one thing that indigenous peoples and pastoralists are getting tired of, is that those short-term kind of engagement that looks like very externally driven agendas are being implemented. And so there's need, of course, most of the gains and even talking of restoration and rights recognition, they take forever. They take a long period of time, and so there's need for partners to commit into working with these communities the whole journey, not just funding a single project or a single high visibility kind of event. there's need to, to have that long-term kind of engagement, be it in projects or be it in the cause that we are both pursuing. So that has been an issue, and this opens up now that we know exactly what we want. And when you put together what you want, come up with a roadmap, see how to go about it, what resources are needed to run some of the initiatives. And I think, for example, pastoralists in particular have been neglected even in climate change, climate spaces or climate change platforms. Most of the funding you see right now is directed to, other ecosystems. And we keep saying, for example, if you fund the forests, and leave the pastoralists will invade into the forests. And so there is need to have that kind of very, not just flexible financing, but being intentional into creative, dedicated financing, and very flexible, again, because the moment it's highly dictated, it becomes very difficult to even access. So direct access, there is need for the shift to very genuine partnership. There is need for, making it a long-term relationship, not just as a one single of funding or project. And also, there's need to really be very intentional into bringing about Indigenous women and youth into the table. We keep saying that Indigenous women are double marginalized. First, because you are an Indigenous person, when you come to your own community and you're marginalized by the fact that you are just a woman. And so this aspect, it is important to give it the prominence that it requires. Women must be brought, also Indigenous women, to sit at the table. These women manage a lot of resources, yet even today, they do not have, most of them do not have access or control over land or own land in any case. So there is need to be very intentional about dedicating resources to this particular group. And the youth too, I've just talked about the youth, running away from our communities, not because they want to, but because the pressures are way too many at the community level. And so they run out there to try and get some alternative livelihoods. And this has an implication even on the traditional knowledge I talked about. There will be no generational transfer of this knowledge if we cannot be able to have the youth sit down with the elders to have that kind of transfer. So these things, if not well addressed, have an implication from one point to another. So this is another group that also need to have a particular focus, including supporting them in the, of course, they are very innovative in technology. Technology is now, very prominent even in our villages. And so if this youth can be supported with ideas and all that, then this will definitely, for me, I would call that an effective partnership. It brings all these further marginalized groups also together. Thank you.
Thank you, Samante. All right, I think this is probably a good time to head over to our audience Q&A. We've got about 20 minutes left, although I do have more questions, but maybe that will be saved for another time. Siwe, could you take it away with our audience questions, please?
Yes. Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you, Samantha and Daniel, for such a rich discussion. Our audience has been also active in the Q&A, and I received some excellent questions. I appreciate it. So let's go straight to them. I have the first questions from one of our audience asking, how can local communities and pastoralists make sure their traditional knowledge and land rights are legally recognized and prioritized in large-scale national restoration projects? It's a question for both of you. So, Samantha, would you like to take it first?
Yes, thank you very much. And just to respond on that particular question, on how we can have the traditional knowledge and land rights recognized. I think one of the things that I talked about earlier is, first of all, acknowledging the value of this traditional knowledge. And once you acknowledge the value of the same, then you'll be able to, give these people, the value in itself gives these people a voice, because as I said earlier, it gives them the legitimacy to become the partners that we are talking about. The land, for example, land rights is one thing that Indigenous peoples have been fighting for, and especially pastoralists. when you talk about protecting land rights, you must bring the government on board. In Kenya today, we have a Community Land Act of 2016, and this is a very beautiful piece of law that gives the communities the opportunity to be able to own land formally, getting their titles. And so a number of things need to be considered. One, we must recognize the value, and then on the value of this indigenous knowledge, and also for communities like that own this knowledge, you must be able to protect it, and also where possible try to document for future generations. And on the land rights, we must lobby, continue advocacy effort to make sure that these communities have secured their land tenure systems through policies, through law, and this will only be done through continued advocacy efforts.
Thank you very much. That's really a helpful answer. Xenia, would you like to add something from the policy side?
Maybe just to add briefly to what was already mentioned, and I certainly think that it's exactly the way to frame this is really to bring this together. Where we come in is, of course, trying through an international agreement that is UNCCD to really get the best examples, best solutions, best practices out there from around the world, and to put them in the legal and policy framework that would then enable countries to go further. And again, you know, it's not a road that is not bumpy. I know that it's again, it depends on specific circumstances, but again, you know, I think it is important at the international level to recognize and celebrate also successful examples when it is happening, when it is taking place, as well as, you know, put the spotlight on areas which really need to be improved. So and UNCCD is just one of those international agreements. We have very strong decisions, for instance, on land tenure. We are one of the few international agreements that has that you know, decision that gives that framework and legal basis for addressing these issues. But there are also, of course, our sister conventions on biological diversity, on climate change, and other international instruments that, of course, also have a link to the issues that were already discussed. Just as a very quick plug, during the day, the Land and People Day at COP17, we will have specific sessions talking about these issues. So one of them I'd like to highlight, it's called Restoring Land, Recognizing Rights, and it is actually exploring some of the novel examples and ways in which countries are proposing some of those big shifts and developments in the international law sphere, but also at the national level, to really strengthen the aspects that were already identified. And the second session that I would like to mention as well is the session on pastoralism and knowledge systems. And this is, again, you know, I think very much echoes to what we've heard about so far. How can we bring together that ancestral knowledge, traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and also, you know, benefit from the new technologies and innovations that might exist in order to better, you know, and to better understand what's happening, but also enable us to better manage and guide the future development of these areas.
All right, thank you, Xenia. Yeah, it's really important to have the international level for a spotlight. And also thank you for sharing the agenda. Also, we have a question about the same line, but about scale. So it's a question for you, Xenia. How can community implemented restoration move beyond the pilot project stage and attract sustained large-scale support?
Wow, $1 billion question there. So I think, again, let me just start by saying that what was mentioned earlier about the need for moving beyond that kind of single project mentality to really long-term investments is what we need, because in many cases, land restoration and the, you know, drought resilience efforts, they're not one-off. They have to be sustained, and they have to be invested in with that long-term vision. We know, for instance, on rangelands, you know, these are the economic analysis are very promising, that they tell us that rangelands, if you invest in their sustainable management and restoration, they bring returns even higher than some other ecosystems. But again, we already mentioned that at the same time, they're very often degrading or becoming or becoming at risk much more than some other ecosystems, and it happens almost like, you know, in silence, right? So what we would like to do is to first of all showcase what are some of those pathways for sustained investment, what needs to happen in order for those investments to succeed, and it could be also a blend of policy instruments, but also, you know, sort of the incentives that would be put in place. Sometimes it's, you know, de-risking investments, the initial, you know, capital that would go into it. Sometimes it is making sure that those very land rights and tenure rights are secure, so that people know that if they invest, then, you know, it will be something that themselves and their children could also benefit and manage going forward. And then finally, I would say that advocacy again was mentioned as a key component for success, and again trying to make sure that we have a very clear message, we have a very clear recognition of the importance of these efforts, not only for the sake of the environment, but really for the sake of the well-being of the communities, the health of our economies, and ultimately stability and you know, prosperity as we know it.
Thank you very much. Very helpful answer, especially for our activists in the field. Now we have a very ground question for Samante. It's a person asking what good practice in restoration would you recommend for drought from pastoralist areas like the border regions of Ethiopia and Kenya share?
Thank you very much. And I think this is a question that is coming out in common spaces. And I think one of the restoration efforts or in attempt to try and address the issue to do with the land degradation, one of the restoration efforts, especially for pastoralists, is to try and negotiate with the government for favorable policies that support land use systems. In this case, for example, in Kenya, most of the time we find that we have, wildlife corridors, but for livestock, there's never, or at least I know none of any kind of livestock corridors when it comes to them moving from one point to another. And this movement is across the borders. Southern Kenya, Northern Tanzania, Northern Kenya, and Southern Ethiopia. And so there's need for that kind of negotiation and to get that support. The policy space needs to really work on supporting some of these ideas, especially when it comes to across the borders. Between Kenya and Tanzania, we have an EAC, one of the regional bodies that really, if it doesn't put into their systems or into their policies, the need for pastoralists to move from one place to another, from one country to another, which actually we experienced some not very good, something very tragic about 5 or so years ago, when the animals in Kenyan animals that moved to the other side of the country in Tanzania were confiscated and the herders were jailed. And so there's need to invest into that policy space to make sure that we have policies that are pro-pastoralist, that support some of these elements like the mobility. And then, of course, there's also, looking to ourselves also, the issue of, having some land use plans and grazing plans also support us in land restoration. And this can only be possible if we go back to having our traditional governance systems working. These are the authorities in the communities And so to avoid a lot of overgrazing, to avoid even conflict, then we must go back to embrace these existing traditional governance systems, as these give us, the calendar of events, for example, not calendar. Yes, it's a calendar. Where do you need to be in this particular time? Of course, climate change is coming to interrupt that calendar, but at least with acknowledgement and giving back the power to the traditional authorities, then with these efforts will lead to some land restoration. So there is need to play it at the policy level with the government, and also us as the communities. We need also to look internally and go back to how we used to do things a few years ago. Doesn't matter what the disruption that has come around because of the climate change, but the moment we go back to that, then you find that the set and land use plans that have been set will be followed to the letter, and we will avoid a lot of land degradation, including right now. I see there are efforts even to talk about, I know overgrazing is not something we take it lightly, but again, we have to accept and also the realities on the ground that we need also to manage our herds so as not to cause further degradation. And again, when it comes to new intervention in terms of carbon, for example, happening. Carbon by itself is a new initiative in the pastoral rangelands and savannas. And if this is not well managed, leads to even more degradation because of the confinement of these animals in particular species, because we are out there trying to harvest carbon. So there is need also to look into the intervention, the pressures, the external pressures, and see how best we can manage for carbon, for example. Even the benefits out there are not properly, are not fair to communities, and we need to engage in this conversation, free, prior, and informed consent for the investors. Once we are not okay with the benefits, we should opt out. There should be that option all the time. So I'm looking at it from all those dimensions.
Thank you, Samante. It's a really rich answering, especially what you mentioned about it's not only, especially for these common areas, it's not only about government, it's also something multi-level governance, which you have this benefit for all the stakeholders and for all the authorities of the community. I'm afraid that we can have only one question left. Sorry for the questions that didn't be answered. So we have the final question for Xenia. It's a question from, it's like asking, how can communities restoration work to be made more visible and recognized in the international framework?
Thank you very much. This is a wonderful question. And again, I would say that, first of all, it really does need to be made more visible, because I think when we very often get the dry statistics about how much we're, of healthy land we are losing every year to degradation, or how much more drought, climate change impacts, and all sorts of calamities we're facing. And again, I think we're definitely not spared any of those in any parts of the world. Land degradation really is a phenomenon that is not restricted to any particular continent. It is something that is felt and affects really all parts of the planet. We need to also show that things do happen, and we have successful examples of progress being made, and that progress is made by the people who are very often the unsung heroes of the land restoration stories. And again, this is something that we as a convention are very committed to supporting and highlighting. I think there are a lot of laudable initiatives out there that seek to do just that. We are trying to put our own contribution as well, and showcasing some of these solutions and achievements through the programs that we lead, and obviously trying to tell those stories in a way that would, again, let me come back to where I started, that when we do restore land, we restore hope. and we restore our communities, we restore our cultures, we restore our economies, we restore our health. These are the ways in which we see that we need to not only tell the dry statistics and to really kind of bring in the sense of urgency, which of course includes and exists in many ways, but we should also balance it with that story of success, of achievement, and real collaboration that happens, and we see that it happens everywhere and at every level. So this is what we're hoping to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all our audience for your thoughtful questions, and I apologize to those whose questions we couldn't get to today. Thank you again, Samante and Xenya, for your generous answers. Sabrina, I will back over to you.
Thank you, Yue. Really appreciate you guiding us through those audience questions. And before we go, we do have a few minutes left. I'd like to go back and give Xenya the floor. Maybe you can give us one final teaser about what to expect for COP17. I know we've been talking about it throughout, but it is coming up soon. So maybe we want to give a final push.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, Tsuye, and Samante. First of all, I would like to really say a huge thank you for having us take part in this Generation Restoration Dialogues. I think that in particular, I've really appreciated the experiences and the priorities that Samantha shared, because what we try to do really in bringing together COP17, and not only, of course, governments who are, the signatories to the convention, but also what we term as non-party stakeholders. It's a broad term, but it's essentially talking about all the communities and youth and indigenous representatives, women, farmers, pastoralists, who really have that strong stake in what happens at that major gathering. So for us, we are looking forward to probably a very diverse and well-attended conference. I saw in the chat there were some questions whether it's possible to follow it remotely. Yes, the main sessions will be live cast through the UN Web TV. So there will be opportunities to follow it from afar. But what we really hope to achieve is to see how the work of the convention ultimately is relevant and it relates to everything that is happening in every part of the world. So it's not only people who are meeting in a particular place at a particular time who care about the work of the convention, but it is really something that is carried through in every country and in every community, and with the people at the front and center of all of these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Xenya. I will definitely be following along on those live streams as well. Samante, would you like to say a final word to our audience as well?
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. And it's really an honor to be here once again. And thank you, Xenia. I'm very honored to share the speakership with you today. So I think for me, my last words would be, if we talk of restoration, I think for me, successful restoration begins with rights. Secure land tenure system that pastoralists and indigenous peoples in general have been struggling with, inclusive governance, and also genuine, what I call genuine, I don't know if genuine is the right term, but they allow, what I mean, very genuine partnership are the foundations of which restoration and climate resilience is built for us as pastoralist communities and indigenous peoples in general.
Thank you, Samante. All right, well, that brings us to the end of today's session. I'd like to thank Xenia and Samante again for bringing such depth, such rich depth to this discussion. We are really grateful, and I know our audience is as well. Thank you again to Siwe for hosting the audience Q&A. And furthermore, I hope today has left all of our participants with a genuine sense of what each of us can do to support and amplify the leadership of the people most deeply rooted with land, Shout out to everyone who has joined us live today and submitted questions. As always, it is your participation that makes the dialogue meaningful. And last notes before we sign off, please stay connected with the broader conversation by checking out the COP17 website, UNCCD-COP17.org, and our own G20 Global Land Initiative website at g20land.org. If you missed any part of today's session or want to revisit the conversation, the replay will be available on the G20 Land Initiative YouTube channel. And I'd also like to prod you all to do your part and amplify the message by sharing today's session with anyone you think should engage with this conversation. I hope all of you attending COP17 later this month have a very fruitful time. I hope you enjoy all of these events that we have prepared. And we hope to see you all at the next Generation Restoration Dialogue in September. Thank you all, much appreciated, and goodbye for now.